Hey, PreSales Collective, it's your host, James Kaikis, and today I'm going to be joined by Rich Kline, Vice President of Solutions Engineering at OwnBackup. The topic of today's episode is the 5 R's of leadership. Rich and I are going to discuss what these 5 R's are and how Rich brings them to life in his day-to-day. As leaders, we have a style in the way we operate. And a lot of times as we want to grow and scale, we need a framework that will work for our entire organization. So in today's episode, Rich discussed what those 5 R's are. As someone who worked at Salesforce, I learned a bit about the 3 R's, but Rich has expanded his philosophy and management style, and we're going to hear how these come to life in everything that OwnBackup and their pre-sales organization does. One of my favorite things about the podcast is bringing management philosophies or operational styles to life, because I firmly believe that we should be learning what other people are doing and make that part of our DNA at our organization. So I hope you find some value in today's episode. Enjoy.
Vivint offers a way for companies to deliver an incredible buyer experience, with pre-sales leading the charge. With Vivint, companies can meet the demanding needs of the sales-proof buyer by aligning sales with product, providing repeatable workflows, delivering on-demand product expertise, and winning more deals with transparency and trust. For more information, visit vivint.com.
Rich, welcome to the PreSales Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much, James.
It's great to have you on the podcast. We've had the fortunate opportunity to meet face-to-face at the San Francisco local event. That was a great time. It was great to finally meet you in person.
Absolutely. And thank you for everything you do. And anytime we can be in person is fabulous. I think I was just mentioning I am down in Vegas, a place where you grew up. It sounds like you got some roots down here. I love the town. It's one of those things, hate it or love it, but I'm going to be in the love it category. I've actually recruited people while being in Vegas, I think is the answer. And the energy is back. And that's, I think, very relevant to our careers and really working with people.
It was very easy to say, hey, it's a lot easier to be home. It's more convenient. It's more efficient. But at the same time, you just lose the level of depth when you're not face-to-face, when you're not in person. I think that's why we were so happy to meet people face-to-face, because, we've talked to people for years at this point virtually. And so being able to build that bridge in person, nothing like it. And like you said, being at a conference and having a lot of energy around you, it's just motivating, right? It just gives us a little bit something more.
I get the energy as much as, then you can reflect it back. So it's just awesome.
Rich, before we get into today's episode, I wanted to highlight you left Salesforce to go to OwnBackup, and someone I worked with at Salesforce, Rich Rose, went over to OwnBackup. So I've been following along, and you've had tremendous growth over there since you joined. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks. So, listen, I got to go back to the future with OwnBackup. I joined Salesforce when it was 1,800 people. So OwnBackup, I joined even smaller at 100 people, and we're now 800. It's easy to round to 3 years, but it's only really about 2.5. So the growth is amazing. And that 8X growth is in every metric that we look at. But the one that I'm most proud of is the idea of the number of 5-star reviews on the Salesforce App Exchange. This is how people understand what it's like to be a customer of OwnBackup. And we love that. We're adding support. I'm here in Vegas it's called Knowledge 22. It's the ServiceNow Dreamforce, if people know what that's all about. We also have added on this journey support for Microsoft's cloud platforms. And, when you're growing fast, there's nothing better. I mean, that is the truth of it. But my colleague Phil Makings, another New York Salesforce alumni, reminds me that it never gets easy. There are challenges, and I think that that's what we gravitate to as leaders.
It's always so awesome hearing people who were early stage at big company brand names that we know that leave to go somewhere else. And hearing how that experience is different is always good for people to hear. But Rich, before we get into today's episode, which is going to be a very interesting one on the 5 R's of leadership, let's rewind and talk about your career journey. What got you to where you are today?
So the beautiful thing is, this is one of my interview questions, like, how did you become an SE? And I think the PreSales Collective is really helping us in amazing ways. But my journey was related to having a 1-year-old son, and I was delivering professional services and missing key milestones of his life. So it was one of those things, you get a call, you need to be in London on Monday and it's Friday, and you were not planning on that. But the SE leader from the company approached me and he said, hey, you can stop billing your time, which most people who bill time find that to be fascinating or the ultimate scenario. And I'm going to reduce your territory from the world to just the United States. And I said, yeah, where do I sign up? And oh, by the way, there was probably something about money in the whole equation that caught my attention as well. So that was fabulous. But after a few years of doing the SE gig at Macrovision, I was promoted into a leadership role, and it just felt amazing to be able to mentor other SEs into the role. I thought I was going to be there. Like my career, if you look at it, sort of 4 years everywhere. And I recommitted to another 4 years, but this company called Salesforce called, and I got an itch. And my wife supported my decision because I had to take a step back and go from leader, manager, whatever you want to call it, to individual contributor. And I wasn't really sure if that was the right move, but the rest is history because it was an unbelievable rocket ship and so much the right move. And a huge shout out to Shannon, Todd, Stephanie, Dominic, Doug, Pat, Brad Herman, all previous PreSales podcast guests and all of my colleagues that made that journey at Salesforce so much fun. And it really was. But with 11 years of learning at Salesforce, one of my passions, a lot of people who know me, I support the Michael J. Fox Foundation. And if you think about it, the seminal movie is Back to the Future. So I got to rewind the clock and take everything I knew from Salesforce. And, we're going to be 75 in an instant. And, the growth is absolutely the rewarding thing.
Love hearing your journey. And it's so great to hear your perspective and all the guests that you mentioned, right? Salesforce has a reputation for producing really strong pre-sales leaders. Rich, I'm really excited to get into today's topic of the 5 R's of leadership. One of the things that we like to do on the podcast is talk about fundamental philosophies that leaders have been utilizing within their roles and bring into their organizations so that those listening can say, hey, I should do that in my org. And I love these 5 R's. And so we're going to spend a lot of time digging into this and digging into your philosophy. So as we start, I'd love to know, what are the 5 R's and how did they come to be?
So they were a gift by a woman by the name of Sarah Roberts. You might want to look her up. She's an amazing SE leader at Oracle. But when she joined my team at Salesforce, she gave me this gift of the 3 R's. And they were recruiting, revenue, and retainment. And we thought about it. And I said, hey, Sarah, we don't have a retainment problem at Salesforce. We're scaling so quickly. And so we added a 4th R of ramping. So at that point, we recruit, we ramp, we of course have revenue, and we left retainment, even though it wasn't a particularly big issue to talk about.
I love the 4 R's. And before I ask you what the 5th R is, I reflect back on my own interview process at Salesforce and had to dive into what I was going to do on recruitment, revenue, and retain. And so it's a nice little blast from the past for me as we dive into this episode. But what is the 5th R?
Again, a gift. So Tarang Luthra was interviewing to become an SE leader, and he just slayed the entire audience when he delivered the 5th R. I didn't know that it was happening. I think some people sort of knew, but it's relationships. I mean, it spoke to me in such a strong way, and it's really the reason why we're on this call together, on this podcast. It's everything the PreSales Collective is about. I mean, you build the relationships between people, between companies, and between this SE population. So you own that R in the biggest way.
Shout out to Tarang, great pre-sales leader who's had a great career, multiple promotions over at Salesforce. So I actually love hearing that origin story. I didn't know that. I'll have to reach out to him. I like these 5 R's, recruiting, revenue, retainment, ramping, and relationships. And I appreciate the call out on PreSales Collective because what we're trying to do, right, is make the pre-sales world a little bit smaller. Keep those levels of connections and keep that network effect growing. And I like these 4 R's. And as I mentioned, right, I was asked in my interview process how I was going to bring these to life in my day-to-day. And conceptually, these make a lot of sense. And so I'm curious, how do you operationalize these R's as it relates to you and your organization?
So you can do it at a whole bunch of different levels, but the easiest one that helps me remember that you need to look at an SE organization holistically is every week I write an agenda for our leadership meeting. And I have right at the top of the Google Doc, the 5 R's, I paste them down and I start filling in topics that are related to these. So we can have a holistic discussion around the business. There was a joke when it was just 3 R's that it was revenue, revenue, revenue. But any SE will tell you that they have so much more to offer than just working on deals, and especially from a leadership. And then in my one-on-ones, I bring all of my issues, all of my topics to my senior leader, Charles, our EVP of sales. So I report directly to the head of sales, and I present this in that format. And what's amazing is he has previously managed SE leaders, and he really appreciates that. Of course, every day he wakes up thinking about the number. He understands that his job is much bigger, and this framework works for him. Then, of course, I ask all of the people that report to me to bring their topics, their discussions in that format so that we have a balanced discussion around all of these.
There's always been so many people who just say revenue, revenue, revenue. Revenue is our job. I feel like there's all these other things that we do that actually just influence the revenue. So I like that you've mentioned that and that your leader, Charles, is aware of that. But where I always like to dig on the podcast is like the operational and making this part of your DNA. What I have learned from PreSales Collective and all these amazing conversations I've had over the last couple of years is when organizations make these types of frameworks or mentalities part of their operating principles and part of their DNA, they really come to life. And so you had mentioned that you're rolling up to your boss, Charles, and even bringing these in your one-on-ones. But what are some of the other ways that you're making sure that the R's are operationalized as you've gone from 8 to 50 and will go to 75?
When you're growing from 100 to 800 people hiring, you got to think about recruiting. And operationalizing that is a function. So we, of course, have a SaaS application, Greenhouse, to do that. But it's really about making sure that recruiting is top of mind. And a sales leader who was behind on their hiring targets asked me, like, how do you do that? It's great to talk about it, and I'm like, oh, well, that's easy. It's 25% of their comp plan. And he just looked at me and he immediately got it. It was just like, oh, you had sent people to do what you need done and then you do it. It was really funny. I'm not going to mention the person's name, but it happened literally at the San Francisco PreSales Collective meeting. Somebody who was previously on my team, we were having a great conversation, and I very humbly said, oh, I'm not having a hard time with recruiting. And this person just looked at me and completely like, oh yeah, right, Rich. Recruiting isn't hard. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like the truth is we're ahead of our number. And retention, the other R, we've really not had any retention problems. And so, it's all about really thinking about them. There's so many gifts that I've been given by previous leaders that I've worked for. But, one was this idea that I worked for them. And, retention is all about that. And, it's like, how do you get learning into the whole mix? And that is where it's about. When they're growing as an individual, then, that's another example of really making sure that they love their job.
I love that you keep calling them gifts, right? They really are at the end of the day. They're gifts given to you. And I love when they start to become part of our thought process and part of our speaking points, because it's obviously resonated with you. So you as an executive, right? Let's hit on this recruiting section because this is pretty important for most folks. How much time do you spend recruiting as the VP of the organization?
For sure, it's 25%, maybe more. I have this line that anyone who's worked for me, I don't know where I got it from. We're going to kiss a lot of frogs to find our prince. And I know where it generally comes from, but there's never a candidate that I'm not willing to speak to. So my leaders bring them. And I even say, listen, don't just bring me all the good ones, because then I have a hard time really understanding the total talent that we're talking to. So don't just try to shield me and just pass through the best ones. But I spend a ton of time. And yet, it literally happened yesterday. We were in this environment where we're talking and having lots of customer conversations. And one of my leaders walked up and like, do you have time to talk to a candidate? And I'm like, yes, like you've worked for me for 2.5 years. You must know that that's my answer. And she was just being nice. And, she just was being respectful, but the answer is always yes. And I love talking to them because I learned so much. I've talked to probably 2,000 different potential candidates. And one of the things that I tell each and every one of them, so it's no secret, is I learn more from the questions that they ask. Like, what are their discovery questions? Because this is the trait that I'm really looking for in an amazing SE, than any of the answers that they're going to give. So, I have a pretty solid process to sort of figure out if they're going to make a great SE. So I have that backed up with just a ton of experience. So it's a lot of fun.
I appreciate that perspective. And I do appreciate that you as an executive are willing to get in the field and interview, because there are plenty of leaders out there, some that are probably listening that say, I don't have time to interview incoming SEs. And, sometimes that could be a detriment to the organization as you are growing and scaling. But a lot of times it can't always happen due to the demands of the org. And you mentioned that you spend about 25% recruiting. There's 5 R's here. There's also the older school mentality of, revenue. Beyond recruiting and revenue, where do you spend the most of your time as it relates to the R's?
In my role in an organization of 800 people, it's relationships. And, Tarang was so amazing to codify that. But in actuality, because I have to know the people in product, because we bring the opportunity gaps of a product that is, in one sense, an amazing product with 4,400 customers, but we got to keep making it better. And so we have a well-defined process, but I'm talking to product marketing and product management and even R&D. So that's where I see that. And obviously having relationships with the sales leaders to make that happen. So it's something that I love. I treasure relationships. You brought up Rich Rose, little known fact. I met him when he was 3 years old and I was 5 years old. So talk about relationships. It was because our dads were best buddies that we met. And I've now hired him twice. So that's a long-term relationship.
I love that. So Rich, we have revenue, retain, recruiting, ramp, relationships. Will there ever be a 6th R?
We've been tossing it around and it's tough to get on the list. It is absolutely tough, but I've been thinking, and experience brings a bunch of benefits. We're tossing around the idea of resilience. We're thinking, what's the next 18 months going to be like? And, resilience might be something that we all need. We need to buckle down and recognize that the R that'll never be on the list is recession, but, we can't be blind to this fact. And the opposite side is, I'm a pretty glass 3/4 full kind of guy. And this might sound negative, but it's healthy to think about strong companies that thrive when the going gets tough. And the 2 obvious ones that were founded right before what I would consider the last tech recession, which, some people call the dot bomb, were Google and Salesforce. And you know what happened there. So I don't know what's going to happen. All I know is that when that happened, I certainly questioned, hey, is pre-sales something that I want to do? That kind of thing. Actually, it was bigger than that. Is tech something I want to do? And I got great advice. And that is that you have a superpower and you need to use that superpower. And this too shall pass. And it absolutely did. And so, 2 years later, I'm still doing tech and still loving it. And I didn't actually buy a pizza franchise. So that was a good move.
Thanks for sharing that, Rich. That's awesome to hear. As we talk about the R in relationship, I actually want to come back to something. And something that we've talked about previously is this, where are they now document? I think that's super unique and really interesting. So can you talk about what that is?
Hypergrowth Salesforce, we're hiring, boot camps for just solution engineers. We're 40, 50 people a month kind of thing. So I had the honor of leading the SMB SE team. And if you had SE experience, the likelihood that you were going to be placed on a team upmarket was pretty high. So I had to think outside the box and find people that we were going to mint SEs. This is, again, in line with what the PreSales Collective making a bigger tent, that kind of coming from. And then I can't say it any other way. The gift that was given to me by Tony Rodoni was this idea of promoting their careers and let them free, let them go and do amazing things. So the where are they now not only was where did they come from, but where did they go inside of Salesforce. I'm pretty proud of the fact that over 11 years, we never had a regretted attrition on the SE team, the SMB SE team, the team that I had the honor of leading. And I'm pretty sure that's a Salesforce record. But, I just encourage them to seek out their next opportunity. And it created an amazing culture. And everybody kept this document, and it started as a Google Doc, and then it became a Quip Doc because that's what you did at Salesforce. And now it's something a little bit bigger, and these people are scattering around. And, some people came back to the team for their first manager leadership role. But the most amazing thing is when I think about this group of about 150 to 200, I'm not exactly sure the total number, 6 of them that I can think of became VPs either at Salesforce or at other tech companies. And I think that is an amazing career. And I don't think it's going to end because there are still people that were early in their career that are getting to the place where they're directors and still on an amazing career journey that started in some instances as an SE, but ended in product marketing or whatever the case may be. And that's absolutely fabulous.
I really appreciate that perspective, right? I use the word appreciate because in Liz Wiseman's Multipliers, she talks about organizations that create fiefdoms. And I know Salesforce is big about, explaining Liz Wiseman and multipliers, but there's so many people who at times have talent and they hoard that talent instead of letting them go. And I've always respected and always wanted to operate like, the American football coaches of the 70s. There was Walsh at the 49ers and Bill Belichick with the Patriots, not to get into a sports reference, but they were known for creating these amazing assistant coaches that would go on to lead organizations and be very successful. And I've always felt like that is the reflection of a great leader, is watching your people leave and do great things. So I really appreciate and I really respect that was part of the DNA.
I love that you brought up multipliers because Tony is the ultimate multiplier and he was actually interviewed for that book.
No way. I didn't realize that.
I mean, he's just a crazy, amazing leader. So I got to learn from the best. So it was just so easy to do.
One of the things that you mentioned a little bit ago was this concept of superpower. And there's a concept that I know that you live by called SE Insight. What is that?
So SE Insights are just sort of the idea that we as SEs look at deals differently. And I love the idea that we can see around corners. And there might be a ton of reasons why we're going to win a deal, but a lot of times SEs can articulate maybe 2 or 3 reasons why we might not win a deal. Good sales leaders understand that signal is really, really valuable. And listen, I actually carried a bag. I was an account executive for a year and I hated every day of it, but I did it. And it helped me appreciate being an SE and an SE leader and appreciate what and how hard being an account executive is. So when we bring this, sales leaders often appreciate that insight that I wouldn't expect. I mean, it's so hard to get out of bed in the morning and be an account executive. So they don't need to think negative. And if positioned properly, SEs can really have a big impact on a deal. One of the ways that you can do that is just in our little world of deal contributions, just say, hey, this is why I think that things are going to go well, but we might want to double check on this or that. And when sales leaders see that, they're able to just sort of get a better sense of forecasting, whether that's this quarter's business or this month or whatever your period of time that you're looking at is.
Rich, one of the things that I've learned a lot is that the folks who are in this role that were previously carrying a bag have a level of empathy that is much different than those who've never carried a bag or had to really be responsible for that quota. And I think it goes a long way. And I think you nailed it. When it comes to SEs, we do look at deals differently. We see the signs. We don't always have happy years. Sometimes we have pessimistic years when it comes to deals. So operationalizing those insights and then really the contributions allow us to have a bigger seat at the table. And I think that's what we are continuing to fight for as PreSales Collective is how do we make sure that this role continues to have what I like to call a strategic seat at the executive table? Because It is team selling. There are so many things that happen now in this modern buying era that we are the true co-pilot, and doing a lot of these operational aspects as it relates to the SE's involvement in revenue, I think are mission critical to our growth as a profession.
Absolutely.
So Rich, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm really happy that we got to dive into these 5 R's. But maybe the most important question, and really why I was so happy that we decided to use this topic, is the advice. Because I think that there are a lot of leaders out there that are maybe struggling to find their voice or their operating principles or their management frameworks. And we talked about the 5 R's today. So what advice do you have for those leaders who are struggling to figure out how they want to operate?
I think that leaning on some of the company values at OwnBackup, and of course, I'm going to bring in a ton of what I learned at Salesforce, but I love this new value we're always driving forward. And thinking, okay, so now you have a framework, and recognizing that you're not going to get it all done, and you're definitely not going to get it all done today. It's just this idea that if you move the ball down the field a little bit every day, then you're going to help your organization succeed. And the other point is that, people overestimate what you can accomplish in the short term. A lot of times leadership interviews are about 30, 60, 90. And I changed that, because if the answer to that is, I'm barely going to get anything done in 90 days. Let's be real. That's your first insight of actually telling somebody. But I changed it to, let's think about it as 30 days, 6 months, and a year, and then be realistic about what you really want to accomplish in a time frame that you can do that. And, Mark Benioff spent a lot of time talking about how important alignment is. And that's important whether you're, I don't even know how big they are, but 70,000+ people, or in the case of OwnBackup, 800. Okay. Alignment is critical. He used his E2 mom tool. Okay. I actually love to use the CRM tool, and more importantly, dashboards. So being amazing at dashboards is an absolute critical skill in the sales distribution organization. And the way you know that you've accomplished that is that when people are coming to your dashboard and refreshing it before you do, that they find so much value that they want to know that alignment is in that dashboard to company goals, and they want to feel how they're doing as it connects to the company goals. So those are like the operational and like, how do we get stuff done? And then the last one, and this is just really, really important, because I was having a really terrible day one day, and I went and saw my manager, and she just said to me, Rich, we're not curing cancer here. We're selling software. And it was a great reminder that it's important to recognize what we're doing here. And OwnBackup has a value of, we take our work seriously, but not ourselves. So our mid-year kickoff is going to be in Vegas. We're going to blow off some steam, but every day we wake up thinking about how we can make our customers successful. It's just really important that you enjoy the journey. I think you and I have both had an amazing pre-sales journey. I think that this message hopefully is going out to people that will want to go on that journey. And our goal is just to tell people how great this job is, because it literally is the greatest job in the world.
Agreed, Rich. Hey, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective and sharing your time with us today. And I look forward to more people in the community learning how to operationalize these 5 R's and really bring them back to their organization at the end of the day. So thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you so much, James. Super appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
All right, PreSales Collective, that was a great episode. I really enjoy hearing these fundamental management philosophies and how they come to life within an organization. I said it in the opening, I said it on the podcast, making these things part of our DNA is mission critical to growth as a company and organization scales. There's a lot of talk about culture and what culture actually means, but the reality is that when you have a philosophy and everyone is utilizing that similar philosophy within your organization, it allows for alignment, as Rich reflected that Mark Benioff said for his organization. And I like that we spent a lot of time on recruiting in the people aspect of things, because it is so important. there are times that we get stuck in revenue because revenue is what matters at the end of the day and drives our company forward. But if you're not doing the other things around it appropriately or accurately, it can have an effect on the bottom line. And hearing how Rich talked about these R's as gifts from people in his past and in his network that he's learned from is really impactful, because really, this is the premise of PreSales Collective, right? I feel like I'm starting to say this more and more because I want people to understand that we're trying to make the world a little bit smaller. We're trying to be able to say, this is what's working at this company. This has been implemented at this company. This is how you can use it in your day-to-day to move your organization forward. And as you figure out your management style or your organizational style, this is a great conversation to reflect on, to understand, hey, am I doing everything that I need to be doing to move my organization forward? So if you have a similar framework or you're utilizing the 3 R's or the 5 R's, please reach out to me and let me know. I'd love to continue this conversation. Also, if you go to the PreSales Collective Member Hub, you will find that we've turned this podcast episode into an article so you can bring this management philosophy to life. All right, PreSales Collective, as always, I will see you next week.